Thanks for all for joining us. I am Nick Hill. I work at the Celo Foundation. I manage our DeFi for the People initiative, as well as explore new use cases for the Celo blockchain. So that usually involves a lot of pilots and different things like that with our different ecosystem partners. And so today I'm excited to have three folks who are going to talk about the future of financial credit. So we have Aaron, Brendan, and Patrick, all working on different facets, but all related to lending. And so with that, what I first want to do is give them a quick chance to intro themselves and what they're working on. So we'll start with Aaron down there.
Cool. So I work at Goldfinch Finance, and what we're mainly doing is bridging stablecoin capital into real-world loans, primarily to credit funds and fintechs, primarily also in emerging markets. So the idea is to have longer-term sustainable yields that help to bring real-world economic activity onto the blockchain and leverage a lot of the digital wealth that's sitting on there that people want to allocate to real-world purpose.
Great to meet everyone. I'm Brendan from Massa Finance. Massa, we're building a decentralized credit bureau on Celo, along with an embedded lending protocol. We merge off-chain data with on-chain data. We support 90 countries with data, including FICO, TransUnion, Equifax, bank transaction data, and alternative data, so that we can score anyone from thin file to thick file in any of those markets. So excited to talk to everyone today.
Hello, my name is Patrick. I'm a founder of a project called Moolah Market, which is a borrowing and lending protocol built on Celo that allows owners of Celo, Celo Dollar, Celo Euro, Celo Real, or our governance token Moo to earn compound interest, which is paid for by borrowers who are either able to take over-collateralized loans in perpetuity or under-collateralized loans through a process called credit delegation. We've been live on the Celo network for just over a year. We've done about $2 billion in transaction volume. As of this morning, have approximately $75 million in deposits and about $16 million in outstanding loans.
Cool, thanks. So I want to make this super conversational. I imagine some of you folks back there might be jet lagged. It's also a little past lunch, so I'm trying to make this a little more engaging. And then I also want to give you guys a chance to jump in as well. So first thing for any of you guys is, all right, so we've talked about in crypto and Web3 about changing the way we do credit, right? And a big piece of that of what we've been talking about at Celo is making that accessible in one way, shape, or form. And so for any of you and on the projects that you're working on, how do you think of accessible credit? Like, how do you think about the design for that? And who are the core users you're really thinking about when you think about designing something that is accessible when it comes to credit?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first. So given that we're on the initial interface with the user, so really targeting 3.5 billion people that don't have access to credit, 1.7 billion people that do, we actually serve both of those users with an emphasis on thin file customers, subprime customers, invisible prime customers, and what that means is they're people that don't traditionally have credit at a credit bureau. When I moved to the US 7 years ago, as a British person, it took me 7 years to establish credit, kind of going from zero back up to something. And it's one of those situations where credit gives credit, and in order to move forward and build leverage, you have to have access to credit to do that. So what we do is we bring together different sources of data off-chain to allow users who are traditionally thin file or credit invisible to build some kind of credit identity, and then using Celo or a blockchain as an intermediary layer, it aligns incentives with liquidity providers or capital providers who want to target those segments, which isn't traditionally the way with banks and financial institutions that serve those users today. There's a barrier with getting the data, and then there's a barrier with the incentive to actually lend to those users because traditional credit providers are all competing for a known pool of borrowers that are traditionally within the system.
Yeah, and I think also traditional credit has become a overly complex process where rents are extracted at every single point. So cost for borrowers goes up at every single point. And then everybody in the very conservative private debt markets are also incentivized to decrease risk at every step in that point. And where you end up is very costly borrowing and also unwillingness to lend to the, credit invisible or the bottom of the pyramid because banks could take corporate exposure in their countries and get a lot a lot better yields and a lot lower risk. And so I think DeFi is kind of an opportunity to start from ground zero and ask the question, can we build a more efficient process for getting money to where it needs to go, and at the same time give access to the yields that are offered by these bottom of the pyramid customers back to people on the blockchain to kind of create a sustainable, decentralized, borrower looks at lender directly system.
Yeah. In terms of building with a sense of purpose to enable access, the first design choice that we made was to build on Celo and leverage the tool set. The second was really focusing in on mobile users. So, we built our application to be mobile first, and then we worked on a desktop version. This manifests in a number of different ways, including making sure that we have integrations no matter where people are on the technology stack. It's important that you can access Moola Market whether you've got an iPhone 13, an Android device, or a feature phone. And really just making sure that you keep this in mind as you make design choices, and you promote these types of integrations and prioritize integrations such that no matter where you are on the technology spectrum, you have access to yield and access to credit. But it really is just a set of priorities and design choices.
Cool, thanks. And so you guys kind of hit on this, right? Like, I think, Aaron, you also mentioned kind of these, like, the borrower piece and the lender piece. And you're basically trying to facilitate on both ends, right? Because you need to have both sides to basically work out. And then you have, in traditional finance, you have a ton of intermediaries in the middle who are cutting out, as all of you guys touched on, different fees there. So on one of these aspects I want to touch on first is, all right, so on the lender side, right, like getting enough liquidity, and getting enough liquidity in a way that's sustainable for said borrower market. How are you guys going about making sure that you do have enough liquidity to then be able to say, hey, there isn't a huge market for people who would potentially want to access? But how do you get that initial sustainable amount of liquidity?
I am always skeptical of marketplace models, which ironically I joined one at Goldfinch. And so I think it's always going to be a balancing of both sides. But for example, we were looking to grow our AUM very quickly through kind of February, doubled our loans in February, and then all of a sudden we had this liquidity constraint. And so it was literally all hands on deck, all the engineers, all the ops people, all the credit people coming up with a strategy to ensure that we have the right amount of liquidity. And so I think we're able to achieve that, but right now it's still crypto native people who are willing to invest into these pools. What we need to have in the future is a greater amount of sophistication, ability to pool capital, draw capital as and when it's needed, but also tap into like TradFi institutions that are willing to give these massive tickets, because if you're going to like rely on crypto retail for too long, there's a limit to that, and then also in a crypto winter you're a lot more exposed. Whereas if you have traditional finance institutions on board, you're able to kind of balance out the flow and the need for capital.
Yeah, so we started with a focus on the supply side of the marketplace, and really had a strong emphasis on making sure that we got cash in such that borrowers were able to borrow. And we did this in a number of ways, including partnering with a decentralized exchange called Uniswap, which uses the M tokens, which are tokenized receipts for depositing into the Moola protocol, as really the base set of tokens for the exchange that they've built. And this was a really mutually beneficial relationship that we were able to establish very early in our life cycle. And what it meant is that as folks were depositing into liquidity pools inside of Uniswap, it was also TVL that was deposited into Moola. And so this had the benefit of the depositors that they earned interest on their deposits by lending it out through Moola. They were also earning the swap fees for the pools that they were in. Since then, we've introduced liquidity mining incentives. We're currently incentivizing both sides of the market, which has been a very interesting experiment to run and something that you can only do in DeFi. You can't do that in TradFi. It's been fun. So if you deposit, you earn the lending yield. You also earn some of our governance token. If you borrow, we currently have negative interest rates for our stable coins, which means that you get paid to borrow, which is just, it's insane. It's an irrational market. It's not going to last forever. But what it does
It's up
is...
right now, by the way. So if you go on your phone, you could access it right now.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch. It's been fun to be a part of, and it serves the purpose of really just creating an incentive and getting folks and getting liquidity into the system, with the hope that over time it becomes sticky liquidity. And it will become sticky liquidity if we're able to create the conditions that provide for financial primitives that normal people end up using either to earn interest or to borrow against. So there's all these different tools and tricks that we can use to incentivize the demand and the supply side of the market, but we focused on integrations and the supply side, and then ultimately the demand side came because we had cheap capital to borrow.
Yeah, and just picking on a different thread, so both my participants here are really focusing on sort of liquidity provisioning or giving that directly to the user. What we identified when we were coming into the market, that you couldn't build a two-sided marketplace with just retail. You end up looking like Prosper or Lending Club, and both of those models failed spectacularly. And the entire liquidity stack moved to institutional hedge funds who are essentially gobbling up the best loans when they got listed on the platform. You have to think this market's going to go the same way, especially with lending, and you've got to bring those participants in to be able to scale. So what is the barrier to entry for those participants? The barrier to entry is visibility on the loan book, or the types of loans, or the data underwriting the loans of the portfolio of loans within the lender's sort of debt book. So what we started doing was really realizing that in order for it to scale beyond initial liquidity, you had to bring trust into the system, and that trust is built around a data layer that is native to the entire decentralized finance system, and that is building a decentralized credit protocol, credit bureau. So for us, we're participating in the market to bring that layer of trust, knowing that institutional investors require that in order to be comfortable deploying large amounts of capital into protocols like Goldfinch, into Moolah, into many other lenders that are going to come onto the platform, in order for us to see embedded lending in every DeFi app, which I strongly believe will happen. We need those institutional participants. So our view is provide trustworthy data that can be used for underwriting, create an API that's on-chain, so as those credit and liquidity providers can access the data to analyze the composition of loans. And with that confidence, more money will flow into the system. And we're partnering with people to bring liquidity in, or using existing institutional investors we have on our cap table to bootstrap our protocol.
Great, you read my mind. That's exactly what I was interested in understanding a little bit more next is, I know you just talked about it, Aaron, I've talked to you about this too, of kind of thinking about this credit risk metric, right? So how do you actually assess credit risk? Because that is a big challenge when it comes to something like microfinance, which is distinct from, let's say, TradFi, like large-scale finance for lending. So if you guys can dive in a little bit deeper on how you're thinking about credit risk. And I know, Patrick, I think we're piloting something on more of a community-based model that doesn't rely necessarily on a credit risk in the same way. But yeah, if you guys can dive in a little bit deeper about how you think through a credit risk modeling in this type of market.
Yeah, I think credit underwriting is part of the traditional like debt process that like don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in that case. The way we're approaching this at Goldfinch is we're kind of starting with aggregators of capital and moving closer and closer to be able to do direct lending to individual borrowers. But the first, kind of layer is working with credit funds who have very good underwriting standards, who we know personally and all that kind of stuff. And then larger fintechs, and then slowly bringing it to be more decentralized, more democratized. I think as that process goes on, what we need to do is develop a community that is learning and understands how to underwrite these deals, and also get people who know how to underwrite these deals from traditional finance or whatever other backgrounds to be able to act as kind of signals within this community. Like, oh, I've seen these 5 credit professionals invest in this deal. This is probably a good deal. And so I think it's super important to with a fine-tooth comb, figure out all the things that can be combed out of the credit process, but underwriting is one of them. And I think there's too much of a attitude, kind of a naive attitude of crypto solves this. Let's just put borrowers in front of lenders and efficient market theory will figure itself out. And that's just not going to happen. To build sustainably, we want to make sure that defaults are low, especially because a lot of people in crypto don't really understand the concept of principal at risk when you're trying to do yield farming.
Yeah, I'll just dive in and sort of add a couple of points. I think two interesting things that were raised here is one is what is your entry point with your product? And then two, how are you evaluating or assessing what risk means within the context of credit? And often people are always very focused on the credit assessment and ignoring collections. And just addressing these sort of two intersections. So when you're looking at going to market, you have to enter a low risk profile with a lending product if you don't have any historic goods and bads to kind of support your scorecard. We live in a world where there's an intersection of data, blockchain, and lending or credit. The world of experience with people knowing how to solve those problems is vanishingly small. So we need to create tools that mean a general developer can access these products and integrate them in an embedded way into their product where a lot of the decisioning and risk calculus is taken into account with the infrastructure you're building. So entry point, things like credit builder loans, lines of credit, direct to a lender sort of lines of credit are really low risk entry points to get that initial traction. If you start going out and offering purely unsecured loans that are personal loans to people directly through a DeFi credit score that's purely crypto transaction based, you're going to be up against a very, very strong headwind. And then the second point I mentioned about collections, your decisioning is only as good as your collections. And what we don't yet have in full DeFi world is the equivalent of ACH or Plaid or Dwolla for collecting payments, whether it's directly from a wallet, directly from an exchange account. And until we get that in place, we've got a big barrier to going fully native on-chain. Hopefully someone will build the Plaid for crypto that does debits from accounts. That would be amazing. But yeah, that collections piece is largely unsolved, and you've got to have a transition and an entry point to the off-chain world in order to kind of solve that risk point in your credit supply chain.
Yeah, on-chain credit scores is one of the things that I'm very excited about because we have an opportunity to take back the reins from these morally bankrupt corporations that have given us FICO and do something much better. We have incredibly rich data on-chain in terms of how long has a wallet existed? What has been the balance over time? What kind of throughput does that wallet have? Has it borrowed? Has it repaid? Has it done all of these types of events? And then you layer on an ability to do things like run eigentrust algorithm on top of that and see, okay, I trust this wallet because I know that Praveen owns this wallet, and then I'm able to infer the trustworthiness of the wallets that have interacted with that wallet, and then eventually you're able to map out this entire social graph. Combine that with the identity protocol that Celo supports. You're giving folks an identity, you're giving them an ability to create a credit history where all they need is a mobile device to start that. And this is something that I'm very excited about. We're also working on a pilot with our friends at Katani Pay, as well as the Celo Foundation, on an employer-based lending model, which is unlocking unsecured loans between employers and employees. And the way that it works, at a protocol level with Moolah Market, all the loans are over-collateralized. But the way that we're unlocking unsecured loans is that the employer is depositing cash from their balance sheet into Moolah Market. They then get a line of credit that they can either borrow against, or if they choose not to borrow against it from the wallet they deposited, they can assign the borrowing capacity to other wallet addresses. So in this case, they're assigning the line of credit to their employees, and they're giving amounts that they're comfortable with. And this is unique in that the employer has a very unique insight in terms of underwriting about the risk of who they're giving a line of credit to, because they know how much they earn, they know where they live, they know what kind of skill set this employee has, how long, whether or not they anticipate they're going to continue working for them. And from an employer perspective, what it does is that they're earning interest on their money because it's being lent out. They have this new benefit that they can offer to their employees. And from an employee perspective, they are getting a lower cost of capital relative to having to go to a payday loan, for example. And they're able to use this cash to finance their their life. And so this is an area of great exploration. I also think that we're going to see a whole lot of different credit scoring mechanisms emerge, and underwriters being able to pick and choose which credit scoring mechanism is right for their risk appetite. And they look at various attributes. We can also ingest off-chain data, and we can do it in a zero-knowledge way that will give us some signal of events that may not take place on-chain. When you combine all these together, we can really change the world.
Yeah, and just to add to what Patrick's saying, I mean, that's the thing that we've really focused on. Patrick's talking about this sort of on-chain paradigm of scoring from wallets. While today that isn't a huge addressable market, there is, like I said earlier, this 3.5 billion person population of people that don't have access to credit. Ingesting off-chain data sources in a way that consolidates data into an identity, which is what we're building at Massa, allows for the bridging of the world today to the world tomorrow. And what we're looking at doing is really accelerating the adoption of that first, 50 million, 100 million wallets that kind of come on and build a decentralized identity on the platform, and then can use services like Patrick's saying. But yeah, I think we have to step into the bridged world before we can go pure crypto native.
So we have 5 minutes left. Anyone in the audience have questions? I can keep going, but I imagine other people have more interesting questions as well.
Don't be shy.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's got to be some.
You scratching your ear? Was that a question? Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Victor. Yeah, so the question is, because blockchains today are transparent and we can see everything, what happens in a world where we introduce privacy layers, and will we still be able to infer creditworthiness? And I'd say it's to be determined. I think that we could design with that kind of problem in mind. Most privacy protocols have view keys, right? So you have an ability to disclose information. The difference between traditional finance and this is that the user is the one that decides to consent whether or not to give the view ability to a credit score or to an underwriter.
Yeah, so I would reiterate what Patrick's saying. We've taken the view that very strongly the user owns their data, and we're the custodian of aggregating the data for the end user. We already do a zero knowledge layer where you can share privately between participants. The participant being the lender. Through a private smart contract, you're able to share one-time access to your credit file. And from there, the lender can make a credit decision or access deeper data off-chain through an API. So the world is here. You've just got to make that user experience very, very accessible to the end user, as we were talking about in the previous panel up here earlier today.
I would just say that if you want to be lending off-chain, though, you start to come into a lot of issues with KYC, AML. Like, if you are lending off-chain, sure, it's a nice idea to be anonymous, but you also don't want to be lending to people on sanctions lists. And so I think as you do more off-chain lending, you're probably going to see more need to disclose your data and, dox yourself. I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too effectively.
Yeah, well, I'll push back on that a little bit. I think you can have your cake and eat it too. In that, we can design systems where perhaps there's trusted entities or trusted groups where you selectively disclose the fact that, you prove that you're not on a sanctions list, right? And then once you prove that, then you're able to enter this realm of privacy. And everybody who is in this realm of privacy knows that there is an entity that has verified this particular fact about you. And we could build very robust private systems that enable private peer-to-peer payments and all of these types of things without having to let everybody know everything about us. So I don't know. I feel like that's a false choice. What other questions do you have?
Yeah, what other questions?
Yeah.
Yep.
So I'm not sure how relevant.
Wait, you got a mic coming to you.
Hey, so I'm not sure how relevant this is necessarily since, obviously you might not have any information on it, but it seems like...
Good start.
Yeah, so a lot of the solutions that you're proposing right now for actually scaling out this credit scoring model rely on zero knowledge proofs, right? I think we can all kind of agree on that, assuming we want to keep it without too much KYC. But with that in mind, we also need to consider that governments also kind of want to know like how people are transacting and stuff. So do you think zero knowledge proofs and the wrapping of these very particular data points that we need for credit will, like, do you think zero knowledge proofs will scale fast enough to catch up with regulation?
And we have 1 minute.
I'll quickly answer. So I don't necessarily agree that all lending is going to lead to a purely like anonymous world where you can just take it out. I think there's always going to be, in certain markets, the need for the lender originating the loan to know the identity of whom they're lending to. It's the transfer of data to that lender that is protected by the zero knowledge layer, and the fact that intrinsically blockchain is open, or distributed ledgers are open, that when you're passing data through it, you're protecting the data from being seen through that pass-through from the user giving permission to the lender using it. So I'm not sure it's going to be a world where everything is forever undisclosed to governments, because there is frameworks today that if we're looking for rapid adoption and reaching the next billion users, playing within those frameworks drives for rapid adoption more than not playing in them, and that the zero knowledge layer serves to protect people's identity information to everybody else that's participating in whichever network you're on. That's my view.
Excellent. So I think we're out of time, but thanks all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Cheers for
Thank you for
coming.
the questions as well.
Thank you.